So hello everyone, thank you for being here. We are just about to start our session on community participation in housing, all the housing challenges that we've seen before. And specifically the frame is that of RE-DWELL. As we've seen, we are focusing on three pillars. Let's say one more focusing on technical details and industrial construction of the buildings, and one more on policy and financing, and the third one on community participation and community-based housing developments. So the three of us, the three early stage researchers that are here today to, let's say, moderate, but that are here with you are me, Lucia Chaloin, and I'm working on interactions and learning practices in collaborative housing projects being delivered top-down in Italy and Portugal. And I'm interested in the participatory methodology of research. That's why community participation is a topic that relates to my research interests. And Androniki, maybe we can present ourselves.
So I'm Androniki, and I'm doing my PhD in Lisbon, and my topic is about neighborhood common spaces. So I'm looking into the physical and social infrastructure that are shared between communities in a way to foment social sustainability, but as well looking at their impact in the urban regeneration. So considering the spatial aspect that they have, both from socio-political perspectives, but also from architectural space, and how does this foment or hinder the long existence of these initiatives. And Zoe?
Hello everybody, thanks for being here with us. It's really nice to have such a diverse panel and experts on so many different topics, but around housing, let's say, and around the participation. So I'm doing my PhD in the University of Valencia. Carla is my supervisor, Adriana is my co-supervisor. And I'm focusing in community-led housing, so how communities can be better supported, let's say, to participate in the provision, in the management, in the property of housing. I'm looking in the case of Catalonia at specific case studies. And that's it. And now, should I present the panel? Okay, so we have Angelos Varvarousis is here with us. He's a Ramon and Cajal Senior Research Fellow at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. We have Newsha Salari, a PhD researcher at the Universiteit Ramon Llull. We have Andreas Panagidis. He's an early stage researcher at our network, the RE-DWELL network, and he's based at the University of Cyprus. We have Margaux Lespagnard, and she's a PhD researcher at the Vrije Universiteit, Brussels. We have Josep Maria Borrell, who is the technical coordinator of Impsol at the area metropolitan of Barcelona. And we have Ana Vaz Milheiro, is an assistant professor at the University of Lisboa. And we have Margherita Marinelli, a junior innovation and project officer at Housing Europe. That's all, right? And Androniki will present you a bit
So, yeah, just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss now, because we are already a bit over time. But we organized it in three thematics according to the interests of the panelists. To start with three statements per every round, and then the discussion will open through questions from us or other contributions from anyone, including the audience. So we would like to make it more very informal and invite you to even come closer so that we close the circle, because I think we fit perfectly. So the first round will relate to community participation in urbanization processes and in social infrastructure, the creation of social infrastructure. And we will have Angelos, Andreas, and Newsha having the introductory statements before the general discussion. Then the second round will focus more on alternative housing models, such as collaborative housing and housing cooperatives. And then we will have the statements of Zoe. Jose is not here, unfortunately, and Margaux. And in the third round, we will focus on housing provision, maybe as a more top-down approach. And we will have Margherita, Anna, and Josep. No? Or Josep. And then, in the end, we will try to wrap up everything with some more general, let's say, discussions.
It's interesting that these three areas in the end are very interconnected. So we sent a survey just to see your interest and just to see what you are looking for from this discussion. And we realized that our topics are really, so you have really a lot in common. So topics such as neighborhood planning, urbanization processes, integrated renovation, gender perspective, community life, diversity in housing, so are really cross. So no, just that, and I think we can directly start with the first discussion. So I give the floor to Angelos.
Good morning. Thank you a lot, to the organizers for inviting me here. I'm not a housing scholar, but I work at the Autonomous University of Barcelona in the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology. I'm an urban planner by profession. And what we are trying to do there is to try to understand how can we move ahead in what we call post-growth planning for cities, for countries, it's a multi-scalar process. So what I want to say a little bit here, and I will try to make this connection between this process of going towards post-growth and housing. So, and under which scheme, under which conditions all the efforts of for providing sustainable and affordable housing is happening, and why this hinders the very possibility of finally having sustainable and affordable housing. The starting point of what I want to say has to do with, for instance, let's take, for example, all the very important and quite vast new municipalist movements that have sprung in Europe and outside Europe in the last 10 years or so. We have seen that they have come from social movements. Some of them themselves have been something in between a movement and a party. And they have tried to bring people into the municipal governance, in many different ways. They tried, for instance, to increase the level of social participation through processes of participatory budgeting, through processes of increasing social and solidarity economy initiatives, through increasing spaces for social interaction like Ateneus and so far and so on here in Barcelona, and not only here, but in many different places. They have tried to limit Airbnb, they have tried to limit hotels, they have tried to do a lot of very interesting things, and they managed to have a huge amount of institutional innovation at the municipal level in order to achieve these goals. And even if they did it, and even if they managed to have such an impressive amount of institutional innovation in many different parts of the world, we see that housing is less affordable than ever. Which is why? Why does it happen? And this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to work here at the Autonomous University of Barcelona with a concept that we are calling growth dependencies. What growth dependencies stand for is like a series of intrinsic mechanisms that bind urbanization processes and urban development in general to economic growth. And this is, in our view, the very reason that there is like, at the municipal level alone, there is very little to be done, but there are some things that can be done. So I will explain a little bit this idea. What is growth dependencies a little bit, and then I will move I will give the word to the next one. So imagine this. Imagine that we live like in this neoliberal way of urbanization, which favors the private rent extraction. So like big investors, they are accumulating land. They can operate enforced scarcity by having like a certain amount of empty housing in every city, and like in that way regulate prices as a trust. Municipalities do not have access to land, so they don't regulate land because they don't have land, they don't own land. So they are trying to regulate something that they don't own. This is like one sort of dependency. A second thing, imagine that municipalities want to have like some social spending in order to have, for instance, a minimum % of social housing per neighborhood, or in order to facilitate cooperative housing. No, they need to have like money for social spending, but this money comes from tax, and these taxes come from the private extraction of rent, and this again creates like a growth dependency. Or imagine, for instance, the new projects. We have like the very increasing flux of tourism and like new people, expats that want to live in Barcelona, for instance, and so far and so on. This increases public revenue, and increases the possibility for public spending, but this is like a growth trap that is self-fueled in a way, no? So I wanted to pose like these few things to start like perhaps to kick off the discussion and like reflect a little bit on, but it is important. Now we are working, for instance, with the municipality of Girona and with the island of Lanzarote here in Spain, together with some other places in Greece and elsewhere. So what we are trying to do is that we are trying to map these growth dependencies in very much detail and find ways to hack them, to track them and hack them. And we really think that we should bring these many different levels together. Like affordable housing is like a matter of a multi-scalar process that has to do with multi-scalar politics spanning from neighborhood, individual preferences, systemic urban development processes, state, regional, European, and global regulations. So we should think like in this different multi-level understanding of what is social housing. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Can we get the slides up? Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm Andreas. Angelos, it's amazing how you talked about these things that I'm so interested in, and I think we are going to talk a lot later also, because what you are always talking about, the traps and dependencies that might be barriers to institutional innovation, is something that definitely starting to realize is where my research should focus, because I started dealing with community participation as an experiment in Cyprus in order to bring residents from a neighborhood to discuss with municipality mostly as the local authority who is responsible for setting up, let's say, an image of a sustainable neighborhood. But of course, we realize that there are much more powerful actors like the planning department, for example, who set the institutional setting where housing and urban development in general is playing out, that are much more influential than the local scale. And these governance actors, which are dealing with the national or, let's say, wider urban scale, are important, let's say, barriers to create a sort of innovative relationship at the local scale. So I would be really interested to know exactly what you mean by the institutional innovations within a context which is still very much dependent on urban growth and urban development and at the market kind of side. So I'm beginning to think about, also because of the lack of citizen participation that happened when I was trying to set up certain experiments, or let's say they were called urban living labs, but the amount of people that came were not that many, and I'm thinking about a level of mistrust that exists both between residents, which is kind of interpersonal mistrust, and the institutional mistrust which exists from the residents towards governance actors higher up. So this is beginning to look like a cycle of mistrust from a perspective of, let's say, building a research framework. So at the top, we have a neoliberal urban form of governance, and there's definitely literature that supports the claim of clientelistic relations between state and development actors, between many different actors in general. In southern European states, these clientelistic relations definitely for Greece and for Cyprus go even way back to the Ottoman Empire. But there's literature that supports this claim of a difficulty of understanding citizen participation when there are these relations that have been formed in patron-client relationships. And then the lack of affordable housing in sustainable neighborhoods is a fact. Then we go down the circle, which as a result of lack of affordable housing and clientelistic relations being facts, we then understand that there might be a level of mistrust that I was talking about from the citizens towards the technocrats, taking in consideration these two facts that I mentioned, and that technocrats are also underestimating citizens' responsibilities and capacities to participate. So there's two directions of mistrust also. And finally, when we go through this very negative story that I'm telling, we understand that there might be also a lack of social capital, which is very, it's a crucial element, let's say, when we talk about community participation. So lack of social capital has to do with individualistic attempts to solve urban problems based again on those patron-client relationships. And we go back to the start again. So when we don't have a system that supports the concept of community, and it supports client-patron relationships between those who are governing and those who are actually building, then the individualistic kind of approach is fostered mostly. So quite bleak kind of understanding of the situation, I think, from my perspective at the moment. And I'm trying to figure out how do we now, in context who are growth dependent as well as being institutionally crippled in a way to change due to these long established forms of governance, which lead to corruption also. I think the question that I'm starting to pose in my research is, how do we understand community? How do we build social capital at the local level in order to have enough movement to put pressure in these forms of negative kind of relationships? Well, I guess it should have been before the circle. Sorry, I didn't tell you in which order to put them. Sorry, my fault. You can just have a look at the majority of Europeans consider corruption to be widespread in their country, and I'm just using this to place my context of Cyprus within the region of mistrust and corruption. Where does this go? Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, hello. My name is Newsha. Thank you everyone for being here. In these 3 minutes, I'm trying to explain what is my main objective during these 3 years. I'm doing my topic, my PhD thesis on how we can do a slum upgrading project based on Sustainable Development Goals, which are 17 main framework. So I started my topic with what was the other case studies in a world. We have successful and unsuccessful case studies a lot, so I tried to analyze all of them. And I understand that one of the main problem that caused fail all of the projects in a world is the lack of understanding the people participation in the project. And based on the sustainability framework, we know this topic is very important. We should consider the people in the project as a center. But I find a gap, because when we are working with the people and with the expert, we need make a bridge between people as an unexpert people with a qualitative data and expert with the quantitative data. So how we can make a bridge between these two people without any bias, because we should make a connection between them. I found a decision-making tool which is named AMP, Analytical Network Process. It works with both quantitative and qualitative data, and we can have a very wonderful results based on this methodology too. I went to South Africa. I used that methodology and a case study of Alexandra, which is very, very interesting case study in a word. I came up with a very wonderful results, because there are a lot of misunderstanding between the government and expert and the people needs. For example, the people need is water, but the government provide a house for them. So we cannot have a very good result when there is a misunderstanding between these two different parties. So now I'm trying to use this AMP tool for my own case study, which is Alexandra, another one in Iran, and another one in Madrid, La Cañada Real, and I'm working on it, and this is my main objective. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Where does this go?
So now it's time, because we had the 3 first statements of this round that has to do with the urbanization processes, and now we would like to open the floor to questions between you, from the audience, so anyone can say anything now. Any comments or other statements? Okay, then we can do some. So for me, it's really interesting, because I feel like we touched upon several aspects that all go around the same issue. And yesterday when Zoe, Lucia and me were discussing about how we would like to, what we would like to get from this discussion, we thought that it would be interesting to understand in all these processes that have to do with urbanization processes or different governance structures or this collaboration between like multi-scalar collaboration. We would like to bring the discussion on what do you think, would you imagine that is the how we perceive the role of the citizens in these processes. Because we were discussing yesterday how we have this idea of active citizens as something that comes maybe from Lefebvre, and it's the political actor, but then Lucia said another perspective. What do you want to say? So once she says, the question has to do with, in all these processes, what are maybe the preconceptions that we have about the people that participate, that come from different contexts. And the second layer has to do with, because you touched upon institutional structures, how is it possible, instead of only scaling up, to also try to scale across these maybe successful cases or local attempts that have some impact. So these are like the two questions for the three of you and for everyone that might engage with these processes. You can add it.
Yeah, our discussion with me and Androniki, we raised about some issues about citizen activation. We need active citizens. We need flexible workers. It all depends on ideological assumptions that neoliberalism rationality came up with in the latest decades. So how do we deal with a real active citizens that is not just reproducing some market-based logic that instrumentalized and appropriated a truly generative citizen that gets empowered by controlling his city, his social movements and processes. So how do we deal with that? And maybe it's enough.
We have different type of people participation in the project. For example, from interview, having a workshop, teaching some skill to them. But for me, it's important to have the people from zero, from A to Z, not from, for example, because in most of the project that I analyzed, I see that, for example, from the first of the project, they start to talk with the people, understanding them, what is their needs, but without any monitoring, they just left people. And they, expert and architecture, they start to do their implementation. For me, in my point of view, monitoring and having a people during the project and even after the project is very important. Yeah.
Yeah, well, if we go back just to the discussion a little bit about, let's say, I'm still interested to hear more from Angelos about the growth dependencies as barriers. And when you asked about how do we scale across rather than scale up, I'm still finding barriers even in any direction, in terms of like also what Lucia was saying, why should they participate, not only who or how much, but why is the most interesting question for me, because it deals with what are we trying to change, who's going to actually be responsible after this participatory session has been even successful. Who's going to be responsible to take on the policy changes that will have to be made in order to allow citizens to really have an impact in their lives, and not just see this as a moment that is kind of an experimental moment, but in reality and then innovation is kind of in this space, but in reality innovation doesn't happen at the level that it's required for policy to change. So yeah, could Angelos, could you say a little bit about what the innovations in institutional structures were, at least maybe in the Barcelona case, which seems to be the most forward, or that's where it all started, right? New municipalism started somehow, I think, here.
Yeah, like the very new municipalism, because like municipalism has like its roots like in many different places in the world, has been already envisaged, like, you know, but even like way before, like, you know, from Bookchin's understanding of municipalism, like in Cochabamba, like in different places all over the world. It's not like a European phenomenon, like despite the fact that very recently, you know, it has been popularized a lot, like with Ada Colau, with Barcelona en Comú, with the Magistris in Napoli, and like in different places. So, but I mean, what I want to say practically here is that I mean, participation in planning and participation like in the neighborhoods is something that does have a momentum, that is being increasing lately. From processes, as I said, like of participatory budgeting being very popular, like in Brazil, in Portugal, and like in other places in the world, from like what we are calling like public consultation for its project, for Barcelona's efforts like to increase, to have like a certain amount of social and solidarity economy in every municipal sector. Greece's like effort in 2016 to expand the notion of social and solidarity economy and community development to every economic sector with law 44/13 and so far and so on. So there have been like things. The problem here, or like even more impactful, the Bologna regulation in North Italy that institutionalized the urban commons, perhaps for the first time, like to such an extent in Europe. What we see here, and I agree, is that there has been a huge amount of tokenism in these processes of participation, a huge amount of trying to increase participation for the sake of participation, with hoping that increased participation will lead to active citizenship. And this has been done like with good and not so good examples. For instance, the Bologna regulation, the famous Bologna regulation, was like so technocrat in its very essence, so they only welcomed like very detailed and elaborate, sophisticated proposals about how to deal with urban commons, etc., that practically was the upper middle class. What? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying, like, practically, it attracted upper middle class people that had this kind of knowledge, and they could effectively draft such a proposal, bring it to the municipality, acknowledge the urban commons. These urban commons had very little to do with their own means of production and reproduction, so they were leisure spaces, and enabling participation at the level of leisure. It's like always like something that can have like minimum social impact, you know. It's like it's not a leisure activity. In other participation processes that we know very well is like very much focused on the so-called key actors, key players, which means that it is practically circulation of ideas between people who already have access to power. And this is like another way of having like a failing participatory process that cannot enable people in active citizenship in a way. And there is like also another thing that I want to emphasize, and then I will leave it, which is if participation cannot challenge the very direction of what is at stake, and it is limited to the implementation of what will happen under a given direction, this is like, I think by default, somehow condemned to be co-opted and instrumentalized in a way that cannot lead to active citizenship in a way. So I think that it's like a very meaningful participation that we need is a one that is slow, intentionally inclusive, and is capable of challenging the very direction of the whole thing. And it's not limited to a very specific thing that has to do with implementation of an already decided direction. Like a few insights.
Thank you. So I'm Adriana Diaconu. I'm associate professor in urban planning at the University of Grenoble. So yeah, listening to you and looking at the title of the first round, and also at the map that Andreas proposed, that I found very interesting. I was thinking that actually we, and also the bleak picture that, that you proposed, of course it's intriguing. We want to understand why, and actually I think that there is a very big gap actually that and maybe the challenge you put forward talking about participation in relation to urbanization in specific contexts, especially the ones in dark orange, is maybe too much of a challenge, and I will explain why. Because the term urbanization, I mean, I'm mostly thinking from the French perspective, but I think it's not so far from the English one. We actually use it either for greenfield developments or for, let's say, formal urban development of informal developments, both linked to a growth perspective. So, of course, in a traditional way of thinking about urbanism, about urban planning, of urbanization, it is, of course, also very much related to the control of resources, especially of land, related to this perspective of growth that is contrary to sustainable development, where land use, greenfield use, should be minimized or have a zero objective by 2050 at least. So, what I wanted to say is that talking about participation in those contexts, maybe one more thing about this map. If I don't have a similar map in mind, but some ideas of a similar map of Europe from the point of view of the degree of urbanization. I just put forward the hypothesis that it would be, it might have similar elements as this one. So the dark orange countries are the less urbanized countries. So I'm thinking about this gap. So this gap between advanced urbanization, let's say, on the one hand, and let's say less urbanized areas where the challenge about controlling land or getting control of this resource is high, so interests are higher, and giving away power, I heard this word, to people that are not acknowledged to be legitimate in urban planning, so in controlling urbanization. So I think we are in front of this huge gap, and this bleak picture, it's another hypothesis, might come from wishing to transplant models that come from the more urbanized parts to these dark orange, let's say. And of course it's difficult or impossible. So maybe these slow processes, or I don't know, maybe there are also other things that we have discussed in RE-DWELL about learning, about deep understanding when transplanting policy, for example. These are the entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs in the institutions that can facilitate bridging the gap. Otherwise, the gap is too wide, and we might just be frustrated that we cannot bridge it ourselves. Thank you.
So we have two more quick contributions, one from Michelle and one from Andreas, and then we go to the next round of discussion, but we can come back in the end.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Norris. I'm Professor of Social Policy in University College Dublin. I just wanted to respond to the comments about the multi-scalar nature of the housing affordability problem and the focus of political activism around this issue. And I absolutely agree with your analysis. I think that one of the challenges we face is a lot of activism around housing affordability is focused on the cities such as Barcelona, where the problem is most acute. But it by its nature, I don't think to imply this isn't very important, it is, but by its nature, nature of this local focus, it focuses on the proximate or immediate causes, such as overuse of Airbnb, for instance, or it focuses on, trying to put in place local solutions, such as more cooperative housing, more social housing, which are very valuable, but in some ways they're, we have this phrase in English, plastering over the cracks of the system. And I think a challenge we face is the fundamental causes of these problems are not local. They're not even national, and they're within the remit of national government. They're international and associated with financialisation and large flows of money around the world into cities like Barcelona, and they're actually not even within the remit of government to solve. They're often within the powers of unelected bodies without a democratic mandate, such as the European Central Bank or the Bank for International Settlements and the Basel Agreement. So I think a key challenge we have is trying to link this local activism with and encourage people to address and focus on some of the fundamental causes, because I think that's one of the reasons why people get so frustrated, local activists, with this focus on solutions at the local level, at the municipal level, and we need to try link these scales that you highlighted in your comments. The address this multi-scalar nature of the problem of housing on affordability.
If there's time, just like a very short reaction,
Sure,
otherwise
sure.
it's fine. Yeah, I just wanted a little bit to react, like it's something that has to do with both comments, that is like a bit on this, like it's like the urbanized places that have like more trust, and like the less organized places, like as you said, like areas that have less trust, and like this transplantation of I guess this is what you said. Here I think it's important to understand like a bit like urbanization processes not as processes that expand the city, but as processes that you know have like operationalizing land adjacent or very far from cities. And this is what's happening. Like for instance, Greece, that was like 98% of corruption, like people believe that there's corruption. It's not a little urbanized area, it's like a hugely urbanized area, in the sense not only that the vast majority of people live in cities, but also that a huge amount of its land has been operationalized to serve international global cities. Say it islands that are like landscapes of leisure, where like urban dwellers from all over the world go just to have fun. Say it like mountains that have been vastly appropriated for like renewable production going to energy in France. And like huge operationalization, which is the very essence of urbanization nowadays, has to do with this operationalization of landscapes that is happening in the name of the absence of the people in these places. And this is exactly why it's not about transplantation of urban participatory processes like in these places, but it is exactly the fact that these people have been, you know, like Eastern Americans did to the Western Americans, like, you know, when they were moving to the abandoned, to the non-man's land to grab it. It's like more or less the same thing. So I guess it's very important when we are talking about participation, first of all, to acknowledge that there are people living there, that there are cultures living there, that there are like certain types of sociality that are being displaced, and then to speak about participation in a way.
Thank you so much. We will hopefully have some time to expand on these topics after the end of the 3 rounds, but we need to move forward to the second one. And I think Zoe can present her statement.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take it now towards a different point of view. So this was the big picture, let's say, looking at the big processes of urbanization. Now let's take it again more to the ground. Like, while this is happening, there are some initiatives that have been emerging all over Europe. So I will be focusing more on the case of Catalonia and Barcelona, and Margaux will focus on Brussels or not. It will be an European. Okay. So let's say we'll generate this small discussion between us, looking at Spain and European cases. So, yes, pass it, Androniki. Thanks. Okay. So, this is the panorama, let's say, that is happening in Catalonia. There are 68 cases that have emerged since 2008. So, it's just after the economic crisis. So, why is this happening lately in Catalonia? It's the third sector, let's say. It's the third way of providing housing. It's not the public, it's not the market. It's hybrid forms that are trying to initiate projects and to create collective forms of property, of management, and of provision. These 3 things, in the end, come together in the Catalonia model. So, to connect also with the previous discussion, those groups are trying to cover their needs, let's say, are trying to look for affordability, are trying to look for mutual support, are trying to go against isolation in housing, trying to find more supportive ways of living. In order to do that, in order to fulfill their dream, let's say, there are certain resources that they might use. There are certain conversion factors that are helping them or inhibiting them. Within these processes of trying to achieve the result, there are conflicts and tensions that appear, and in the end we see the result that they are arriving. So what I'm trying to do with my PhD, with my research, is understand, pass through. So I'm trying to combine again qualitative and quantitative data, looking at several categories of all those projects. What we see is that there are differences among all these projects. So there are other groups are more self-managed, other groups are asking for guidance. There are different relationships with the public. Some groups are accessing public land, while others are collectively buying land. There are different building characteristics that the groups are choosing to follow. So there are different typologies different categories of typologies, let's say, that we're finding. There are different ways that the groups create community with the community spaces or with the use that they are trying to assign. And there are different relationships with the neighborhood. Some groups are coming from these neighborhoods, while others are appearing at a neighborhood that they didn't have relationships from before. And the groups have different intentions towards integrating, let's say, in the concept, in the context. So, by comparing different case studies that they have different characteristics from the categories that I mentioned before, I'm trying to see these things that I mentioned before. So what are the different motivations that the groups are coming for? What are the resources that they have? What are the conversion factors? What are the conflicts that might appear during these processes? Are there internal conflicts within the groups? Are there conflicts with the collaboration with the external entities? And at what outcomes, finally, do they arrive? And yes, go to the next one. And let's say here I have summarized the key areas where there is potential, but where there are also challenges. So, living in community. How does these groups manage this potential, but also challenge of living in community? With what mechanisms, with what practices are they trying to communicate these problems? Relationship with the public. How do different groups understand these relationships? Are they opting for social housing within the cooperatives? Are they preferring a more autonomous model? What is the impact that they are trying to generate? Many groups are trying to regenerate, let's say, obsolete city centers. Others are trying to create public spaces for people in the neighborhood to enter in the cooperative. How are they trying to achieve inclusion? Many cooperatives are integrating emergency units, are trying to give help, let's say, to more disadvantaged groups to enter the cooperatives. And how do they understand sustainability in the end? What kind of mechanisms are generating to create more sustainable buildings? Some are creating energy communities. Others are opting for sustainable materials, wood or compressed earth blocks. So in order to connect a little bit also with the previous discussion, what I want to mention is that in all this process of groups taking the initiative or not taking the initiative, in many cases there are groups that are formed through lists, that are formed, let's say, in a more top-down way. What are these ways that these people can be empowered so that it's not just a superficial, let's say, way of consulting them or giving them few rights, but what is the way to give them actual rights to create inclusive, sustainable, meaningful living environments? And what is this support that is needed? What are these resources? So it might be educational resources. It might be, apart from economic resources, there are different kinds of resources that they might need. What are these intermediate, let's say, bodies that can help those groups gain this empowerment to create in the end, to respond to these challenges in the end. And yeah, so I think it's interesting because the models are more hybrid nowadays. So it's not just publicly provided housing or market provided housing, but we're trying to see in these cases, in these cooperative CLTs, in all this line of investigation, all this hybridity of how do we collaborate with different actors, how do we support these processes. I think it's important, in the end, to look at the communities and to try to understand what is that these communities need in order to flourish and to create meaningful housing that will really support their well-being, let's say. So this is this line of investigation and of practice that we'll be discussing. So I will give the floor to Margaux, and she will extend this point of view.
Yes, I think indeed what you're finding by studying Catalonia, I've also kind of started to discover during my PhD when I studied projects in Europe. You can go to the next slide already. So I'm doing my research on on equitable circular housing, and part of that, so on the one hand, there is a part of that is circular building, so minimizing as much waste as possible, but another part of that research is trying to understand how housing models work. And I've tried to do that by looking at housing projects as a sort of ecosystem of financing, management, and how those elements translate into an actual building, and who makes the decisions, what decisions are made to support the management model, which building decisions actually mismatch with the housing model and pose problems later. So I'm trying to understand financing and management of housing models in relation to housing projects. And I'm trying to do I did that by doing a lot of site visits, interviews. I've also done stakeholder mapping, so looking at who makes decisions in a design project, and then also decision mapping, why are decisions made, and so on. And I think, you can stay on that slide for a second. When I started my research, I started studying Belgium, but I realized that in Belgium, we have mainly owner-occupied housing and rental housing. We have some things in between, but they are still in a front-runner phase, like just starting up. And so I went to look abroad to see what other ways of creating affordable or equitable housing exist abroad. So I've studied projects in Finland, some Barcelona, Switzerland, and so on. And what I saw was that it's everything, that creating housing models is very complex. A cooperative in Switzerland does not mean the same thing as a cooperative in Barcelona, for example, and regions tailor their housing model to the needs of the residents that are there. And so I guess that what I'm going to present today is something that is really a work in progress, and that's why I really love that there's a discussion today. And it's a way of visually, for me, trying to make sense of housing models, and that's the complexity within them. And now you can go to the next slide. So I've been playing with this thought of spectrum thinking within the housing landscape. Where without any assumptions of what is most important or what is valued most, but more as an idea of that you can see housing models on a spectrum, where for example, if you take a responsibility spectrum of the responsibility of a resident, on the low end you have social rent, where people are often, there's small participatory processes, but as has already been discussed, is sometimes not really that intense. While owner-occupied, on the other side, people are very liable. If there's a problem, they're responsible for solving that problem. They are often also involved in designing their building, not always, but often they are, or they can change things, and there's not really they're responsible for their building. And then maybe you can go to the next. But also, There are also spectrums, for example, for initial costs, where in social rental you don't need a lot of money to get into that housing project, while for owner-occupied housing you need a down payment, you need to have certain capital. And similar for long-term cost without capital accumulation, there you have the opposite side, where as an owner-occupied housing you start to build up capital, so you have low long-term costs without capital accumulation, while in social rental you keep on paying for your money will not accumulate a lot of capital. The money that you pay, your costs will not accumulate a lot of capital. And then I've started mapping everything that's in between. Based on case studies and criteria that I've set up, I've tried to kind of visually place projects and housing models on the spectrum, and I try to see, like, is this maybe a way of looking at housing models as a way of answering people's needs and answering people's abilities. Not everyone is able to bring in a lot of responsibility in a project. Some people, they just want to live, they just want a roof above their head, and if it's a white building with spotlights, they're sometimes happier than if it's a beautiful concrete, building. So some people, they might not need as much responsibility as others might have, and some people are not able to pay as much in the beginning, and so on. And you can start then putting those spectra in sort of relation to each other, and you can start to see like different relations. I do have to say that this is just based on a couple of case studies, so it's not really a data representative visualization, but it's just a different way of maybe thinking about housing models. And you can even then move it into a 3D spectrum. If you go to the next slide, so where you link the three spectra to each other, and we're trying to kind of develop this as a sort of idea for sort of database, online database of housing projects, where if you go to the next slide, we are trying to link back like dots and projects on the spectrum to exact housing projects, where you can see then like how do they get to that place on the spectrum, what are the implications, what are the decisions that they made to get there, and if you want to develop a project somewhere on the spectrum, what have other cases done to be there at that point? So that's the presentation.
If not, I can ask. So, in these hybrid models, let's say, right? Because these are hybrid models where you have to collaborate with the public, with the private, with the third sector. How is this happening, this kind of collaboration? I mean, how are you bringing these different actors into play? I don't know if you have any ideas, Margaux, or with your cases. Like, there are some difference. There's a spectrum again of projects having, let's say, a bigger presence of the public sector, and others that have a bigger, that are basically more market, let's say, oriented. So there is again a spectrum of how different initiatives in the end can create this collaboration between these three legs, at least. And it's interesting that all around Europe we see different ways of doing that. Like, of course, depending on the context, on the political situation, on the opportunities that exist in every context, we see different interplays of these three actors. What I wanna, I don't know if you wanna say anything. A thought that I am, an idea that I'm having is that what I'm seeing here, for example, is that it's really important in the Catalan case, the public support that this has, in order for it to be inclusive. So creating, let's say, public communitarian collaborations can have a very big impact on creating really inclusive hybrid models. So yeah, what I see really interesting in this kind of models, it's not that it's just the public doing its job, the market doing its job, and initiatives as a third sector trying to. It's really a matter of collaboration between different actors. But what I find interesting, at least in the Catalan concept, is how the public really can generate a high degree of inclusivity for these models. So, yeah, while this doesn't mean that there is no, they don't have a say, let's say, the groups, the cooperatives, the third sector. So really generating space for diversity, for opinions, for different views, for different typologies, for different ways of doing it, but with a strong, let's say, support of the public so that it can be inclusive, yeah, and sustainable in the end. I don't know if you have any ideas on that.
That was a very large question, but I think indeed that there's I think for every housing model there should be some kind of framework or like some kind of public protection, at least for the residents that are living there, or some kind of way of being able to create that kind of housing. So there's always a need of sort of government support, if it's not money-wise, then legal-wise or regulation-wise at least. But it's true that if we go to some of the spectra, the 2Ds may be the clearest. It's true that with low responsibility and the other one, you have kind of, you can already see just by plotting a couple of cases, I don't know if I can, that projects that are on like sort of this side of the responsibility spectrum, they're often supported by government, and usually money-wise as well. Like social housing, certain cooperative housing. You have also social cooperative housing in Belgium. We have a couple of cases of that. So these are more on that side of the spectrum, while the ones that are less supported by subsidies and so on are more on the other side. And then you have in the middle the sort of commons, or the cooperatives, the community land trusts, these sort of things. But, for example, this one is right of occupancy housing in Finland, where people pay 15% of the housing, the dwelling's value as a sort of warranty, and they will get it back when they leave. Is a form of social housing, but it's created for people to already get a bit more responsibility, get a bit more financial capital that they can sort of build up with that 15%. And so that kind of that kind of measurements kind of pushes the housing model more in another direction of getting more responsibility, building up capital and so on. So I think that, I don't know if that even answers your question, but I think that there are public measurements, government measurements that can kind of create more diverse housing models. But there should be like government support, I think, for many different kinds as well, just to protect people in a way. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, my name is Ángel Martín. I'm teaching here in the architectural school, and I've been involved also in cooperative housing like Sostra Civic here in Barcelona, and also we have made here some research projects, trying to understand the urban transformations, urban transformation that has been participated somehow, and I was thinking, I was trying to. In my head, trying to connect what you are telling here with the previous question of what should happen for people to participate somehow or get involved, no? And in something. And the first thing that came to my mind when in the previous question was that, well, in my cases and the ones that I know, it's because there is like an enemy, like a certain amenaza, threat, and so if that happens, then people react, like, okay, this is my territory, or this is my need, or this is my, so they get together and they defend it, no? And it sounds like very like, okay, so we need an enemy for people to react, but if we put it the other way around, it's like, okay, what kind of things people would like to defend? How can we make things for people get linked to them in a way that afterwards they want to, if there's a situation, they want to participate to improve it or defend it or whatever, no? So I'm talking about the connection between the urban space or the housing with the people, no? And how we do that. Participation is a way for that to happen, but also any other things, no? Like there should be like a continuous connection with the space that you inhabit for in a way for later expect that people get involved in a process of transformation or do something else, no? So and this links to this kind of cooperatives that you've been talking, because there is a need, an initial need, that is I need a house, and that's what happened in Barcelona also. It's like Social Civica, there's an amazing crisis of need for housing, and so people get organized in a way that, okay, this could be, but later on there's something else. People are now getting organized, and they actually spend like 5 years having meetings and talking about the way to live, they would like to live, etc., without a house, no? So really, and then later on, when they have a house, they continue like helping other people to get it, or trying to be more like how do you do, well, inclusive. So in a way, that helps. This kind of initiative helps to make this continuous link in between space and people, no? That I think so. Well, that's it. It's also the things that came to my mind, like trying to link these two things. I'm really like in love with this kind of initiatives, and like thinking that it's really a way of transforming society in a way in urban environments. Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody want to? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I had two quick questions for both the speakers. Firstly, I really enjoyed your presentations. It's really fascinating work. I just wanted to ask about Catalonia. Does grant of use housing, does it have a specific legal meaning? I just didn't understand that term. And just my second comment on our question on the second presentation, you mentioned that government should support more diverse solutions to resolving the housing affordability crisis. But I wanted to ask why, in terms of what value more diversity brings in terms of solutions. Because, in the decades after World War II, in many northern European countries, mainstream social housing resolved the very acute housing crisis that was there very effectively. And certainly in my view, that model just needs to be re-expanded. There was a solution that worked, whereas a lot of the newer diverse models may have very significant benefits in terms of community participation and you mentioned, there was interesting ideas mentioned about more communal ways of living, which to me sounded they had lots of benefits. But in terms of actually providing social housing, I mean, community land trusts, for instance, have been in place in the United States since the 1960s, and they've delivered, I think, 0.1% of their social housing in a country where 1% of the housing stock nationally is social housing. So that was kind of a provocative question. But, why? Is there real added value in terms of actually solving the problem from diversity?
Yeah. So the grant of use refers to the cooperative granting the rights of use to the residents, to its members. So this is happening at the level of the cooperative, but it can also happen at the plot. So in many cases there is a double grant of use, that the municipality is also granting the land for use for 75 years, and it's not selling it, let's say. This is the meaning of the grant of use. And on the diversity, well, this is a very interesting topic, I think, and it's huge, and it's really, and it has to do also how much do you need to customize a housing to the needs of its residents, right? Like, social housing solved a big issue, a big lack of housing. How much do we need to really provide customized solutions, and how much do we need to, first of all, provide solutions? I think it's really interesting and big topic. And what I want to say is that these customized solutions, the cooperatives, are providing us with experimentations, I think. So I see it as test beds where you can experiment with typologies, spatial configurations, way of relating, and this can be extrapolated to more global models of social housing, let's say, that would integrate innovations happening at the more diverse scale of the hybrid models, I would say. So I think it's important, to go as far as we can, to experiment as much as we can, and then innovative solutions to be able to integrate it on a more global scale, let's say, of social housing provision, of mass provision, maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
I think that's indeed a very good question, and a good question to kind of take a step back and look at what we have been studying in a way, I think. I think that many of the models that are like those hybrid models that have come up are sort of a reaction to things that have been happening, and kind of people trying to kind of grab to their dream of housing, or like or policymakers trying to have people get a bit stronger in society in a way, or by building up capital and stuff like that. But in another way, I might also, and I'm not a historian on housing, so, but I wonder if after World War II there was a huge need for housing, and so they implemented social housing to kind of answer to that need. But I wonder once that need is fulfilled, whether people are not looking for more of a more personal way of living, or more a way of living that is more adapted to how they want to live in a way, instead of being appointed an apartment somewhere in a city that indeed brings a roof above their head, but it's not maybe the way that they want to live. Because for example, if I look at Belgium, for example, where they try to solve the housing crisis after the war by giving people access to owner-occupied housing, we have a huge tradition of creating a house that is specifically for us, and that we will live in, and afterwards it might even be demolished, or someone else will buy it and they will renovate it completely, and you will not even recognize it anymore. And if you, at this moment in time, tell people to go live, people that have grown up in this tradition, tell them to go live in a anonymous apartment, it's very difficult. And I think maybe those hybrid models are a way of answering to the need, maybe not even the needs, the wants of people in a way, I think. But I don't know, that's an answer to that question. Yeah.
I just want to add on that, because I I was at an event where there was a presentation given by someone working for sorry for my Swedish pronunciation, Helsingborgshem. Like there is this, because in Sweden they had this big program of social housing construction, the Million program, after the Second World War. And now they are witnessing very big problems in these areas because there is a very high amount of segregation. And so basically this was affordable housing for everyone in the past, and now it became cheap housing for the poor. And yes, from the social housing perspective, I can also say that a solution now is to indeed, these houses need renovation, but not just energy efficiency renovation, but also, of course, like some attention needs to be given to the needs, the wishes, and the fears of the tenants. So yeah, I'm just going to, I'm anticipating what I'm going to talk about. But just to say that also in social housing, like can be customized. And of course with a big contribution from mediators and civil associations and public government. But yes, this can also be done in these big social housing estates.
Yes, okay, so we can move on if... do you want to add something, Ángel?
There's like 1 minute.
1 minute.
Yeah, just like a small remark, because I think it's... because I mean, there is like a tendency to see like cooperative housing as like a form of co-housing, which means that, you know, the main merit of cooperative housing under this logic is that people live together, they learn how to live together, and so far and so on, which is like one side of the whole thing. But there is also another aspect of the whole thing which is like quite important, which is that cooperative housing actually removes from the market a certain amount of land, a certain amount of housing, and decreases speculation, and it does it. And I think this is like a very important thing that is not happening with social housing, is that by removing something from the market, it opens like the possibility for another way of relating to the very idea of private property, which is also like a very big advantage of cooperative housing. And of course, like experimenting with schemes like that involve like public spending, that involve like public intervention, and so far and so on. I think that you can have like measurable like effects, impact. But just like leaving, you know, cooperative housing like only to private, yeah, this is not gonna make like a lot of difference eventually.
Okay, and let's move to the 3 last presentations. Who is starting? Community participation in housing provision. Who is the first presentation? Androniki? I'm sorry, the first presentation. It's Margherita, okay.
So yes, well, I will be very short, so perfect. So yes, Margherita Marinelli, I'm working for Housing Europe. For those of you who don't know, Housing Europe is the European Federation of Social, Public and Cooperative Housing. And we work on research, we do advocacy at the European institution, and we also develop the innovation strategy of the sector by participating and coordinating different European projects. So yeah, you can also go to... So yeah, on this note, I'm going to just talk quickly about Shape, the small project. You see there, the logo is a project we finished recently, and it was a capacity building and a project focused on capacity building and knowledge sharing of integrated district level renovation. So yeah, I just mentioned quickly before, by integrated approach in renovation, we mean a type of renovation that goes beyond energy efficiency and that of course takes at its core also the well-being and of the community that live in the housing complexes, and especially by considering different factors such as, for example, affordability, factors that are important to tenants, because of course they care about energy efficiency and thermal comfort. But if you go to like a group of tenants and you ask would you like to see in this renovation, they will likely talk about other things that is not about insulation, etc. So yes, I'm happy to talk later if there is more time especially about different types of community participation, because it's true that in social housing is often seen as quite top down, but there are indeed different ways of involving tenants. And for example, they can be involved more in the co-design of the renovation by, for example, pointing out if there are some issues like with spaces, or if it's very cold in a room, if there is mold. But also they can be actively involved in the co-management of the community also for after the renovation. And this is we have seen indeed that models focusing only on the practicalities and efficiency of buildings have had sometimes not very nice outcomes, like in the worst cases, violence and segregations, as I was saying before. And if there is also some time later, I'm also happy to talk a bit about the role of mediators that are very important figures in renovation. And I'm just going to conclude by saying that in order to have a successful integrated renovation, I remember Androniki before mentioned it as part of your work, the district level approach. So the neighborhood level is very important for economies of scale, but also because I think it's very important to involve different stakeholders in the community. That is not only the social housing provider, the contractor, and the tenants, but also different organizations that can, organize workshops, cooperatives, also some shops that are open in the area, schools, also public authorities, of course. And yes, that's all. I think there is another slide, but no, this is the last one. So, yes.
So I will try to keep on time, so I will read it. I try to write something. Usually I talk too much. So I'm a senior researcher. I'm interested in colonial and post-colonial studies and housing for me. And I'm very interested in understand the impact of the past in the present. And so housing, of course, it's a transversal topic here. So I will start it by, for this debate, I will use some arguments that Alexandru Aravena usually debated from an interview that I did to him last year. And I will cross it with a case study in from the Portuguese colonial past in Luanda. So I will start it, if I can. Okay, sorry. So notes on housing for the unprivileged. So from the perspective of the designer, when you do social housing, you start a process that is all about losing control. This is, of course, Ravena talking. And this is just a forward to the question that I want to bring in here today. What can we learn from developing countries and in this former third world when we talk about housing for the most vulnerable? And vulnerable here is, of course, not only economic characterization, but as a result of social, cultural, and historical inequalities. So as a political weapon, housing has always been used to quell popular uprising. So housing is really very important for political scenario. And the next, this slide and the next will tell the story of a makeover of a wooden house, the prefabricated house that you can see in the image, that Mrs. Stair and Mr. Batista's family have lived since 1973 in Luanda, Angola. The story of this house began as part of a strategy to solve the Portuguese colonial state chronicle housing shortage by establishing hundreds of such units in colonial cities in Luanda. No, keep the first ones, sorry, in Luanda. Due to financial and rational constraints, these houses would never be equivalent to those of the middle class. A historical reality that still has repercussions today. So it's generally accepted that public money rarely allows to build what is reasonable for a middle class family. How can you change? So, however, we are dealing here with societies that have historically asserted themselves through their omnicompetence. So pre-colonial communities have always been characterized by their self-sufficiency in production, their own shelter. So the third slide, please. It was this advantage that allowed Mr. Stair and Mrs. Batista to satisfy their needs and to fulfill their own dreams and desires. We can see there in the drawing how they changed the house. A larger bedroom for the couple, a set of rooms for the nuclear family, and then for the extended family when relatives migrate from the countryside to work or study in the city, or even an economic value when it allows them to increase the family income with more rental units. They change completely the house. Technicians and architects in the field are aware that designing social housing means knowing how to establish priorities. But communities know better which priorities they have. And then I'm quoting again Ravenna, such to put it in a disciplinary road. The wisdom to realize what is relevant and that is less crucial is not a matter of charity. Not involving communities in the debate means losing their knowledge. I'm speaking. Once again, the problem is so hard that no one can afford the luxury of missing it. So the last slide, please. So the transformation of the colonial garden house we see before into the contemporary courtyard house we see in the image through 41 years of appropriation. So we are talking about a long-term period of appropriation and transformation, consolidates the intersection between vernacular knowledge and the industrial and waste material scattered around the outskirts of the cities, of these third world cities, as we used to say. In a proposal to frame an architecture for the unprivileged, Nadi Heller suggested this architecture, often described as unqualified, will help to invent concepts we tend to call, and I'm quoting of course, sustainable design. Such an hypothesis brings these self-building improvements closer to the idea of vernacular architecture, and thus contributed to a debate that can clarify how to learn beyond the formal participatory process by making the inhabitants agents of the building solutions. So I think it's more, when we're talking about building solutions, we're talking about needs, of course, and they know how to put it. So using, of course, their particular and very specific knowledge. So we have to trust in the knowledge of these communities, in my opinion. So in the scope of our debate today, perhaps we can gather the courage to a final question that I would like to put it here. Are these proposals any closer to an idea of sustainability? And then listening to the presentations today, I would put it not only idea of sustainability, but an idea of social sustainability. So this is my contribution, and I hope that we can debate a little this possibility. Thank you for your attention.
Okay. And Josep Maria.
Thank you. I'm going to move there. Okay, so thank you for inviting us. I'm Josep Maria Borrell from Impsol. We are a non-profit organization that promotes social housing in AMB, which is the metropolitan area of Barcelona. So what we discovered during the crisis in Spain is that it's what we debated here. It's a matter of changing people. It's not a matter of changing things, but how we can change people. That's the biggest point. So we decided that we have to change things to change people, because we promote social housing since 30 years ago, and we changed lots of things, and that's why I'm going to explain. So please, can you go further away? So during the crisis, we decided that we do not have to promote social housing only for the inhabitants of these dwellings, because these inhabitants will have rights but will have debts. So we understand that social housing, in our case, it's a permanent social infrastructure. So you have to understand, or I understood, that people that decide that want to go to live to a cooperative housing have done the change in their minds and decided to live in a cooperative housing. But this is not the case. So the vast majority of the people we want or we do not want to share spaces, do want to be selfish and things like that. So what we decided is that our buildings have to be like libraries, so a permanent social infrastructure. So always finding looking for the equilibrium between environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and financing sustainability. We try to be we try to find exemplarity. So we always try to provide architectural quality, energy efficiency. We always explain that our buildings will be built for more than 100 years. So we know who we are and how we live nowadays, but we don't know anything about what will happen in 50 years. So our buildings have to be very, very flexible, inclusive, and neutral. We always try to include innovation and industrialization, and we try to give, get that people living in these buildings feel proud of these buildings. So it's what we mean identity building. We are a non-profit organization, so every building have to be self-sufficient and have to have low maintenance. And one of our aims is not only construct these kind of buildings, but also transmit these values to not only the inhabitants, but always to all people. So one of the things that we are more proud is that every time we do one of these buildings, so these buildings, you have to have a minimum between a minimum and a maximum income. So then you apply, and then you win the lottery, and then you go there. Most of these buildings are for rent, but we do promote sometimes dwellings for sale, always if the property is not to be private. So here in Catalonia, it's a little bit complicated, but so the qualification of social housing will always be public. So you can transmit the property of the dwelling, but the price is always fixed. We have done this kind, you can go to the next slide. So in terms of typologies, we started with the typologies changing things, because we think that it's where people lives and what people can understand. So integrating kitchens, generating non-hierarchical spaces, chaining rooms, generating intermediate spaces for thermal comfort, but for social interaction, and explaining why we are doing these kind of things to inhabitants. We think that we start to change things, and inhabitants start to understand that things can be different. So we can design a gender perspective dwelling, but if we do not explain people what does it mean and what we are putting the kitchen in the center and why we are visibilizing these kind of activities, we are not changing anything. So what I always explain is that I am always going to these kind of places to explain these kind of things, which I expect that sounds you interesting. But we are more or less always the same people hearing, and most of these things we always know. So the point is that we have to explain these kind of things to people. And what we are trying to do always when we are giving, giving the flats, or I don't know how to explain. We are going there, we are explaining these kind of things to all the inhabitants, and we are asking architects to come with us and to explain why this building is like this, because they feel proud, because they can ask. There are always haters and lovers and things like that, but the debate is generated. And then you start to generate, some links. So we are not a cooperative because we work with general people, and we try to change their minds. And finally, the third slide is because we try to do our best. We have to be self-sufficient, but that means, for example, sometimes we cannot promote some social spaces because we need to earn money to promote better and better buildings. But our main aim nowadays is social innovation and rehabilitation. So it's not only a point of constructing new buildings. What happens with all those industrial spaces that we have and can be refurbished to promote social housing very, very cheap or very affordable. So there are very clever ways of promoting social housing. And social innovation. So we do not want to give society only the things that we know that already exist. So new ways of living, no? Co-housing, senior co-housings, public and private participation. We try to involve people organizing assemblies and meetings, including volunteering and all this kind of stuff. We are always not teaching, but working with municipalities that they have to innovate, talking with the citizens and things like that. I think it's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So thank you all. It was really, three perspectives, let's say, three scales, let's say, of addressing housing provision and the community. Maybe we had a bottom-up perspective of what maybe could be a real social innovation if we could get institutions to really listen to what people are already doing on the field, on the ground. And my question could be actually, how do we get out of our offices? How do we escape a little bit the social innovation in our offices? Because I think that this is what could be really the challenge of social innovation if we relate social innovation just to organizational features and not of a real power balances change. So how do we really go to people? And maybe we can have a discussion about social mediators. Now, who are the persons that can link these scales? What are their roles? What are their tasks? Who are they? Who could be? Otherwise, we have always this problem of, I had an innovative solution of integrating the gender perspective in my housing provision. And how do I explain people? But I personally think that I shouldn't be in that position of having to explain. There should be something of an infrastructure already present to avoid this, have me on my power position having to explain to the others. That should be because I think that is it's super difficult to have people already at this stage of decision making. So how do we at least have a link, a bridge through our skills?
It's quite extraordinary how I really enjoyed the other presentations. So I think the panel was very good. So congratulations for the organizers and for everybody. But I would like to say something, to add something. I think we still have a very modern way of thinking. And when I'm saying modern, I think the 20th century still. Thinking about the colonial architects, it was very clear in their minds that they could change the way people were through the plan of the house. It's it entering in the domesticity, in the intimate life of the people. And we still do the same. We still do the layout. We still say where the people should sleep and should stay. Why still our houses are like this? I have more freedom in a house from the 18th century than I have in a 20th century house, because the architect, and I'm an architect, defined someone that I don't know, defined where I'm going to sleep. So I'm not saying that we should, of course, make a kind of a tabula rasa from everything, but I'm saying that we have to change these proceedings, this idea. We have to think that maybe the layout of the house should not be used to change people. This is my perspective when I say that we have to learn from these communities that sometimes are living in different geographies from ours. Maybe I want to sleep in the kitchen. Why not? So I'm just making a provocative, because of course I think the layout, it's amazing, the layout of these new buildings we visited yesterday. It's really a huge design quality, but it's always the same, changing people through imposing a way of living in their own house, inside their own house, because the architects, we are not able yet to provide something different. So this is my question mark. Okay.
Well, it's a very, very difficult question. Yeah. Because in what we try to do, we try to give as much flexibility as we can. And I don't know, for example, if can you go to in our I don't know where is it. No, you visited this there, but I don't know if you know I don't know if it's here. Yeah, the Cornellà, no, Sant Andreu de la Barca. It's difficult. The Cornellà model. See, it's this one. So this model, I don't know if you know. No, it's this one. So you access from the balcony, and you have six rooms of same dimension. And it's true that you have the kitchen in the center. But these rooms can be used because all these rooms can be linked. So I think that this is the most flexible, one of the most flexible dwelling, because you can sleep in the kitchen if you want. But you know, you can sleep here, you can sleep here. There's no hierarchy, so everything can happen. And actually, we have made a study, because everyone is living differently there. Because this part is giving a courtyard and this part is giving outside. So I think that everybody can choose the way of living more or less here. And I think that that's what we are. When I was talking about what will happen in 50 years, I think I am. So what we are doing is this. So if you are talking about another thing, but it's true, but my imagination nowadays arrives there.
Thank you. So I think before it was asked by you, Zoe, or I don't remember in the round table before, how much should we customize the housing? And I think this is interesting from a social housing provider perspective, because on one side you want to customize the housing, and on the other one you want to meet an increasingly pressuring demand of quality housing. So I think I don't have the answer for this, but I'm happy to talk a bit about, because I think it's very interesting to talk about the figure of the mediator, because I think we like to think that everyone living in social housing is very grateful and happy, but in the reality there is also a lot of mistrust at the tenants level. Sometimes there is a sort of disconnection, or there is a lack of clear communication. So I think in general, using mediators figures, it's a very good option. But also, who are these mediators? It's also interesting to delve into that, because sometimes they can be people working for social cooperatives. But we also saw in some cases in members that to gain this trust, is always better to use someone that is close to the community. So not people that are anonymous or unknown, and these people living in the community could be representatives of tenants also. Those are very important. Sometimes we forget, and we always think about a professional, but also tenants representatives are very important. Or also people involved with the community, like religious figures. We saw, especially also, I'm talking still about Sweden, but in some cases when the people don't speak the language, or they are part of a different ethnic group, it can be very useful also to talk to these people. And also it's always important that tenants can be trained to become the mediators. So yes, with that, I think there are different options, and also, as I said before, it's also important to understand what kind of feedback you want to get. Do you want to get an approval of the project? Do you want to involve your tenants in the co-design? There is no size fits all. My work in Housing Europe showed me that every country is very different, and is also, I think, in order to get out of our silos, is not only on a vertical level, let's say, but also horizontal level. Like, there is a lot of knowledge and innovation out there, but it's not accessible often. And I think, of course, by exchanging also at the European level, it's always very important. So, yes. I just forgot something. If you get to go to if you get access to the slides, I forgot to mention that I put a QR code. This QR code redirects you to the publication page of our project, and we just publish a short version of the blueprints for replication of district renovation. So you can access to this short version there in different languages, and we are going to publish also a longer version. So yeah, more information and guidelines that can be interesting.
What you asked before, Lucia, I think it's important to this mediation that you said, that how do we go closer to the people to understand what social innovation is about. I think it's important to find different ways of gathering this information, like surveys, workshops, playing with the children to understand how do they feel in these spaces, understanding the accessibility of people that don't have, finding different ways of getting this information from different groups. So, yeah, developing different methodologies of getting the information from the ground.
If we don't have any other questions, I can tell you something about my topic of research that is really related on what we're dealing with, because I'm working on collaborative housing, but public, so being delivered top down as a social housing provision. And my questions would be about actually how much is it collaborative, a thing like that? What maybe to open up a little bit the topic. Also, because I think that all these cooperative and collaborative housing forms are also targeted to some resourceful tenants, to some a really niche of the population that has committed to be collaborative, to engage in solving his or her needs, and wants to get involved also in a high level of knowledge of design and technical details, financial details. So it's really a complex engagement, I think, around collaborative and cooperative housing forms. So for me to find on my field work I'm working in Italy and Portugal, to find collaborative housing, especially targeting vulnerable groups, it was something related to this alternative forms that are really targeting some niche, and it was interesting to see it the other way around, targeting vulnerable groups. But this comes always the questions of a collaborative frame imposed top down. So I would like to see from our we lost Josep Maria to see what you think about these resourceful tenants from one side, from the maybe it's a question also for you, Zoe, on collaborative cooperative housing, and what do you think about collaborative housing for vulnerable people?
I think it's great also to create mixed housing, like also selling maybe part of a house, so it's a revolving fund, and financing the other part, which might be intentional communities, but also with integration of vulnerable groups. So for me, I think creating greater hybrid environments of this creates in the end more relationships between different social categories and social. Yeah, I think mixing is always good. Thank you all very much for coming here, and thank you all for the debate.